Welcome to CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. Coming up, inflation is up and President Biden's poll numbers are down. We'll have more on the political headache inflation is creating and the sticker shock with everyday essentials. Plus, a Christian media summit in the Holy Land and how Christians are making a difference there.
As a builder of a new community, we've taken inspiration from our predecessors, and in particular, the Christian missionaries.
And an artist's inspiration to honor America's military families.
And this just hopefully will raise the level of awareness of that sacrifice that those people are really making, because it's real and it's significant.
And later, Clifford the big red dog is on the big screen and bringing laughter for all ages. We talked to MovieGuide.com's Evie Carroll about the film. All these stories and more are next.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin with inflation. It's putting tremendous stress on the wallets of Americans and is becoming a political headache for President Biden. Some top economists are seeing no end in sight. Jennifer Wishon gives us more in our top story.
Millions of Americans are looking forward to hosting Thanksgiving dinner, but inflation is becoming an unwelcome house guest, putting a strain on the festivities. And it's not just the rising cost of turkey and pie hurting family budgets. This week, the Consumer Price Index, which keeps track of what people are paying, jumped 6.2% from a year ago, marking the highest level since 1990.
It's a ripple effect, and that really puts a challenge as we go into the holiday season.
A CNBC survey shows inflation now ties with coronavirus as the biggest concern facing Americans, and it's punching the president politically. Republicans were hitting the president hard even before this week's report showed inflation heading even higher.
We have the raging inflation, as bad, some would argue, as back in the late 70s, early 80s.
It's a direct result, he says, of flooding the country with money through President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan earlier this year. The president says the infrastructure plan passed this week will help alleviate bottlenecks in the supply chain.
And thanks to those steps we're taking, very soon we're going to see the supply chain start catching up with demand.
But critics say the president's policies are the problem, like cutting back on the U.S. supply of fuel.
He shuts down American pipelines but allows Putin to have his own pipeline.
Today, a gallon of regular costs $3.41, up more than $1 from a year ago. And as winter approaches, the Energy Department estimates heating bills will be up as much as 54%.
Going to be up there probably at least $500 more this year, so they should plan on that.
And while some blame the supply chain problems for inflation, others point out that Europe has those supply chain issues too, but without inflation. Instead, many point to government spending. Democratic economist Larry Summers warned in February that the Democrats' COVID relief plan could lead to inflation. He was blasted by the White House, which called inflation transitory. Now some economists say it could easily last another year. President Obama's top economic advisor, Jason Furman, says inflation is not slowing, it's maintaining a red-hot pace. And now as the president and Democrats work to infuse nearly $2 trillion into the economy through his Build Back Better bill, they're facing more political roadblocks, as Senator Joe Manchin signals concerns new federal spending may make inflation worse. Americans do know the pain because even though salaries are up, prices are up even higher, which means people are falling behind. Some economists and business leaders are looking to the Federal Reserve to do more to slow inflation, but that could mean multiple hikes in interest rates, which could hurt the economy. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
President Biden is expected to announce the nomination of former Commissioner Robert Califf as the new leader of the Food and Drug Administration. Califf served as the FDA Commissioner for 11 months in President Obama's second term and also spent 35 years as a researcher at Duke University. His nomination comes after months of concerns that the FDA lacked a permanent leader during this pandemic. Speaking of the COVID pandemic, cases are spiking nationwide. Right now, 22 states are reporting the uptick just as cold weather arrives. Hospitalizations are up in 14 states, with some low on ICU beds. Health officials say this latest surge is due to unvaccinated Americans waning immunity from the vaccine and more indoor gatherings. The CDC says the daily death toll in the U.S. right now stands at around 1,000. In other news, attorneys in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial are meeting today without jurors to finalize how the jury should be instructed when they deliberate the case next week. On Thursday, Rittenhouse's lawyers rested their case after about 2.5 days of testimony. Closing arguments are expected Monday. The Pentagon says it's closely watching Russian military actions, including a buildup of troops near the border of Ukraine.
What we continue to see is unusual military activity inside Russia, but near Ukraine's borders. And we remain concerned about that.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. knows Russia's playbook, referring to its move into Ukraine in 2014. The Biden administration says it is committed to protecting Ukraine. Coming up, a Christian media summit hosted by Israel with journalists from around the world, and why leaders in the Holy Land believe it's so important. Welcome back to Newswatch. More than 100 participants from around the world joined the Israel Government Press Office's 5th Christian Media Summit on Thursday. The virtual summit focused on the Abraham Accords. It brought together religious leaders from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and focused on how they can work together for peace.
As a builder of a new community, we've taken inspiration from our predecessors, and in particular, the Christian missionaries who 50 or 60 years ago built hospitals, reduced infant mortality, and demonstrated to all of us as religious leaders what the real purpose of our role is.
There are several lands that figure into the story of the scriptures, but no single place is more important to biblical studies than Israel. A trip to Israel deepens love and passion for the things of God like few other things I know.
The Abrahamic Accord was emerging during the time of the pandemic. It gave hope to the world.
CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now with more. Chris, we heard from the Jewish community representative to the Dubai government just now, talking about the influence of Christian missionaries. Tell us more about that.
Well, what's happened, and this is probably in the United Arab Emirates, and what's happening right now is Jewish communities are being established there because of the Abraham Accords. Believe it or not, there's actually kosher restaurants there. They have hotels that have kosher restaurants for many of the Israelis that are visiting. And back, if you look at the back of the history of the Christian missionaries in some of these Gulf companies, they did exactly what the rabbi said. They built hospitals. They reduced mortality. In fact, I heard a story when we were down there at the United Arab Emirates pre-COVID about one of the leaders in the UAE, and because of the influence of a hospital, it had a profound impact on him. They were able to save one of his daughters, and that actually paved the way for many other Christians and churches there. So it's interesting that the influence of these Christian missionaries 50, 60 years ago, even before, it actually paved the way for some of these Jewish communities right now working in these Arab lands. And by the way, there are about dozens of churches actually in the United Arab Emirates. We saw some of them when we were down there about 2 years ago, Mark.
Is the message of working together, Chris, what helped bring about the Abraham Accords? Is that seem to be having an ongoing positive impact in the region?
Definitely, Mark. There's an atmosphere of mutual trust. There's certainly mutual interest with many of these countries and Israel in bearing lots of fruit. We've done a story on the 1-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords. There's expanded trade. There's expanded tourism. Actually, the UAE and Israel are cooperating on trying to get an unmanned vehicle to the moon by 2024. There's people-to-people relationships that are growing. One other thing that does bind them together, Mark, is a common enemy. Iran, and actually there's new and public military cooperation between Israel and some of these Sunni Arab nations. We saw that in something called Blue Flag 2021. It was a multinational aerial exercise a couple of weeks ago, and the UAE Air Force commander visited there. And also, there's just been a joint exercise including Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and the United States. And what that all is sending a message to Iran that militarily, diplomatically, and economically, the Abraham Accords are bearing fruit.
I understand former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was also honored. Talk about that, Chris.
Yeah, during the summit, he was honored. Many of the Israeli leaders, like Israel's President Herzog and others, they gave Netanyahu credit as one of the chief architects of the Abraham Accords. He's been participating in all the Christian media summits as well throughout the past 5 years. But he really was one of the main drivers of the Abraham Accords. We were getting thoughts about that even before the Accords became official. But he really, behind the scenes and publicly, was one of the ones that helped bring the Abraham Accords, and he was honored for that. He was given credit for that, and that's something that was really very, very reassuring, nice, given the politically charged atmosphere we're in here in Israel and around the world. Nice to see that.
Before you go, what's ahead on Jerusalem Dateline?
Well, Mark, we're going to be talking about one of the big stories right now. Will the U.S. consulate be reopened for the Palestinians here in Jerusalem? We went to Ramallah earlier this week. We heard from the PA Prime Minister. He believes it's the start of an embassy for the Palestinians in Jerusalem. On the other side, Israeli leaders are saying that's no way. It's our capital. You can't put a consulate in here just for the Palestinians. You could describe it right now as two cards heading at each other. We'll have a story on that. We have a couple of stories on that. We have a one-year look back at the Abraham Accords. We also have an interview with Danny Danone. He's the former UN ambassador to the United Nations about the rise of anti-Semitism. And we'll have extended coverage of the Christian Media Summit as well, all on this week's Jerusalem Dateline, Mark.
All right, Chris, thanks so much. Chris Mitchell, our Middle East Bureau Chief. Thanks again, Chris, for your insights and your time. And you can see more news from the Middle East with Chris and his team on this station or on the CBN News Channel tonight at 8:30 Eastern. Still ahead in this week, where we just honored veterans, a larger-than-life photo display that also honors their families. As we wrap up the week where we officially celebrate veterans, we want to bring you another story about veterans and their families. Sometimes the families are often overlooked, even though they too make many sacrifices for their loved ones to serve our country. So one Virginia artist decided to create a unique exhibit to honor veterans as well as these hidden heroes.
It looks like a supersized class photo spread out on the front of a massive Virginia Beach furniture store. In this case, the home room includes veterans, active duty personnel, and their families across the Hampton Roads area.
I've never produced a public work this large.
Artist Bobby Levin calls his project Expressions of Courage.
I saw this as a perfect vehicle to marry with things that I'm passionate about. A respect for the military, the veterans and the families, and my passion for public art. And that, I believe, it enriches our lives and makes it for just a better community.
Workers spent 9 to 10 hours installing the exhibit. Levin hopes those who view it reflect on the sacrifice of military families.
There is a shared level of emotion and feelings that every military family goes through. And this just hopefully will raise the level of awareness of that sacrifice that those people are really making, because it's real and it's significant and it needs to be acknowledged and recognized. And hopefully this is the type of tribute that does it.
Every time I look at it, I happen to see somebody else that I recognize.
Laura Baxter is the executive director of the Armed Services Ymca of Hampton Roads. She helped arrange time for Levin to take photos of members of the Y.
He had to make a funny face or, smile. It's not that staunch, I'm in the military, I have to be strong. It's the courage comes in many forms. And when you're talking about the courage that a military family has to entail. I mean, they have to have that courage on the front line, but then also the family has to too.
I feel like I'm famous now.
11-year-old Nevaeh Barnes and her mom Ashley James are featured among the 167 photos.
Courage makes you stronger, and it makes you step through your fears.
We may not leave, but we're at home supporting them every step of the way. So it's very, I'm just grateful for the recognition. We feel seen today, so that's really awesome.
Nevaeh's dad, Marquise James, hopes the exhibit sends an important message.
Just the fact that there's more to the military than the service members. It's a network of people working together to get a job done. For the simple fact of me deploying, she has to take care of the household. She has to take care of our daughter. For when I can't help support her, she has to support us.
Altogether, the massive art project is 290 feet wide and 22 feet high. It's part of a global art endeavor known as the Inside Out Project. A French street artist known as JR started that Inside Out project. Through photos on huge canvases, he wants participants worldwide to stand up for what they care about, to turn the world inside out.
I want to give back to my community. I was born and raised here. I was raised less than a mile from the main gate of the naval base in Norfolk. My father was part of the greatest generation and served as a lieutenant commander in the South Pacific during World War II.
Giving back to his community by acknowledging in a very public way the service of those on the front lines and here at home.
Thank you to our veterans. Well, coming up, watch out, America. Clifford, the big red dog, is on the loose. The big dog on the big screen, that is. Two new movies to talk about this week, Belfast and Clifford, the Big Red Dog, coming to theaters. Plus, a big decision by the actor playing the lead role in the Disney Plus hit The Mighty Ducks. Earlier, I talked with MovieGuide.com's Evie Carroll. Welcome, Evie. First of all, tell us what's happening with Emilio Estevez not returning to Season 2 of The Mighty Ducks, a game changer due to vaccine mandates?
That's right. As you know, the mandates are now that everybody has to be vaccinated if they're on a set. It's kind of an industry standard in Hollywood. And so, what Emilio Estevez said is that he doesn't want to participate in that. And he doesn't believe in the mandate being, being there in the first place. And so the show really is, he's the main character in the show because he's the lead coach. And so I do believe, and we believe that, viewership is going to be affected by this.
Now to a couple of movie reviews. Tell us about, first of all, the movie Belfast.
This is a really interesting movie because it's about the time period of 1969 in Northern Ireland. And it's about the Protestants and the Catholics kind of having conflict. But there's a lot of Christian content in this movie, and that's always nice to see. It's more of an adult film, I would say teenagers and above. And it's done by Kenneth Branagh, and it's done in a beautiful way. And it's very well done, and it's got a lot of great content there.
All right, now to a bigger-than-life dog brought to the big screen. And, of course, we're talking about a family favorite, Clifford, the Big Red Dog. What can we expect?
Yeah, so this is a good family option for this weekend. It's in theaters and it's also on Paramount Plus. And what it is, it's the Clifford books. Remember from your past reading the Clifford books. And so now they bring it into a live action. The young middle schooler, Emily, she finds a tiny dog. He's just a tiny dog at first, and then he goes into a giant dog overnight. And she's trying to keep it from her uncle and the people she lives with. But of course, you can't keep Clifford as a surprise because he turns into this huge dog, and it's all about what are they going to do now. She's created a bond with him, and it's really cute. It's well done. It's for the younger audience, so it's about 6 years old and above.
Okay, Evie Carroll with MovieGuide.org. Thank you, Evie, for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Some options there for you at the theater. Well, before we go, a Rhode Island man is finally fulfilling his dream to become a physicist after reading about Albert Einstein as a boy. 89-year-old Manfred Steiner just earned his Ph.D. at Brown University in Providence. He first followed his family's advice to become a doctor, but then switched his vocation after retiring. Good for him. 6 orphaned bear cubs are growing up at the San Diego Humane Society's Ramona Wildlife Center. They were recovered in August and September, enjoying their outdoor enclosure. They eat about 10 pounds of food each day, play and climb rocks and trees. They will be returned to the wild. There they are. And that's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or you can talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day and a great weekend.